Hi, Moms Raising Sons to Be Men, Chapter 9. You're staying with me. I'm so happy, so excited that you're still here. I hope you're reading through this book with me. I hope you're on this journey with me. But I am so happy that you're tuning in to these videos of the highlights and the insights from each chapter. So let's talk about Chapter 9, which is entitled The Art of Intimacy. When Barry was in middle school, his dad lost his job. He was a youth pastor, and it was a painful experience for their family, and they lost so much, their money. It caused so much strain on Barry's family, on his parents' marriage, and so many things that unraveled because the church had asked his dad to leave his position. Actually, there's a lot more to it than that. That's just putting in a nutshell, not really all the details of what happened. But as a young child, that's all that he saw. That's all that he understood. His father hadn't done anything wrong. But in his frustration, one day he said to his mom, "Why doesn't God do something to help dad?" And my mother, this is Barry talking, my mother could tell I was getting upset with God. With tears running down her cheeks, Georgine cried out, "Lord, please protect my son from becoming bitter toward you." I absolutely believe I would never have become a pastor if my mom had not answered me out of the deep hurt in her heart. If she had answered me. Georgine was struggling with her own pain, her own heartache, but she chose to pray, to intercede for her son. And that painful experience at a vulnerable age could have sent Barry into rebellion against God. Had Georgine wallowed in her sorrow, voiced her own angry disappointment to her family, which a lot of times we do that. We vent to our kids because we can't tell anybody else. If you're in ministry, don't do that. That'll drive your kids away from the church and away from the Lord. Or she could have focused on the circumstances rather than God. She probably would have lost sight of her ministry to her children. And she likely would have forfeited the opportunity to point Barry and the rest of her children in the right direction. Amidst difficult trials, Georgine's sincere faith and godly relationship with her son helped her to mold him into a man who would go on to serve the Lord. Georgine passed away not long ago, and I got to watch her service online because it was out of state. And all of her children and her grandchildren got up and they shared testimony of this amazing woman who had the zeal to spread the gospel, to tell people about Jesus in season and out, always ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within her. But just as Barry could trust his mother's advice because she lived the message that she taught, you too will earn confidence of your son if you display genuine faith in God, even when life gets hard. We're reacting to life's circumstances in a calm way that trusts God. It doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It doesn't mean you don't cry. It doesn't mean you don't tell your kids you're sad. That's not it. It's being real with your sorrow, but taking those tears to the cross and directing your children to do the same. That's what validates your testimony. That's what will make your children want to hear your words. That's what will draw your son to Christ. Sometimes those trials are not about you. They're what God uses to validate your testimony to your kids. Do you think about that? Sometimes that very trial you're going through right now is God's plan to validate your genuine faith to your child, who needs to know if what you believe, you really believe, if your faith is genuine. The unexamined life is a careless life. Your son will not know how to analyze his own behavior unless you teach him. Think of football coaches. They have the team watch the video over and over again of the game that they just played. They examine their mistakes. They examine their successes. They examine the other team. An unexamined life is a careless life. So learn to appraise yourself by evaluating the reasons for your responses evaluating the reasons for your responses to whatever life brings your way. Your son is going to watch you practice self-examination, godly self-examination. I'm not talking about beating yourself up or guilting yourself. We know mom guilt is real. I'll be a better mom tomorrow. You're laying in bed telling yourself, I'm going to be that fun mom tomorrow. I'm not going to lose my temper. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about examining your walk with the Lord and saying, Lord, help me to grow in this. And this area that I have failed, I pray that you would help me to do better next time. When you train your son to think about why he reacts in a certain way, it lays a foundation for true change. So helping your son examine his own heart. In fact, the Bible says, examine yourself to see if you're of the flesh. See if you're of the faith. Sorry. See if you're of the faith. God wants us to say, search me, O God, know my heart. Try me, know my anxious thoughts. See if there's any wicked way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Mom, there's little time to waste. Little time to waste. Determined to live deliberately and not let each day just happen. Spending time with other moms who have the same sense of urgency to mold the character of their children. Take them to the park, play, go to coffee, have them over to your house. Enjoy life together. Enjoy motherhood together. It's over so quickly. And it is such a hard, fun, all the emotions, all the things that you can think of happen through motherhood. But as you go about your day, remember that your son is observing how you live. He's studying your words and your actions and your attitudes to discern whether your relationship for Christ is real. Just like Barry was observing Georgine's reactions. Apathy is your enemy. If your words and your actions are filled with a passion to share Christ and to encourage others, your excitement will be contagious to your children. Your example can teach them that the normal Christian life is one of urgent service to God, and you'll expose them to the idea that serving God is an exciting way of life. It really is. There's no time to waste. In just a few years, your son will become a man. Life is short and childhood is short. 18 summers is all we get. So weigh the use of the time that you have with your son, Psalm 90:12. You're not just changing diapers and burping them. You're not wiping boogers and bums all day long. You're attending his sporting events. You're at their school events. You're homeschooling them, but you're representing Christ to them, which influences not only your son, but everyone he meets in the future. Real quick, let's look at another principle. Principle number 4, knowing your son well allows you to encourage his strengths and correct his weaknesses. Develop ways to know your son well. Men tend to talk about their dreams. Sometimes they won't even accomplish those dreams. They'll just talk about backpacking through Europe. Don't jump right in there and tell him all the dangers of that. And you don't even have a passport and you don't even know how this works. Just dream with him. Let him dream. Let him talk about it. Be his cheerleader. Encourage him to dream about the adventures that he will one day take. There's plenty of time to talk to him about dangers and challenges of specific opportunities if he ever actually pursues them. When you allow your son to share his dreams openly, you are laying a groundwork for him to share his hopes and his dreams with you in the future. Women, we visit face to face, men, shoulder to shoulder. I remember when our oldest son, Tony, came to be our son. I wanted to pour into him. He was 15 years old. I wanted to be his mom. I wanted to talk to him about all the things. But I knew if I sat Tony down across from me that he would listen because he was happy to have a family and a home and a roof over his head. But I don't think I would have connected with him. But instead, when he went outside to work on his Jeep, it was in Texas. It was so hot, so he would do it at night. And I would sit out in the Jeep. There was no top on it. It was a convertible. And he would talk about his dreams of being a fighter pilot, of graduating from high school and going to A&M University. He talked about girls. He talked about wanting to join the Air Force. He talked about girls. He talked about all of his hopes and dreams, and he talked about girls. I got to have some of the best conversations with him as his head was down in that engine, and he listened. And I got to speak truth about purity and about God's plan for marriage. And I know that it's easy to just want to preach at them, but when you listen and they start sharing their heart and their stories, they will invite you in to tell about their own life. Sometimes shoulder to shoulder with your little guy means you just sit there and let him play Legos. Watch him play his Legos. Don't talk about how to do it better, organize the colors, pick up your room. Just sit with him for a while. Ask him if it's okay, if he could sit with you for a while. That might mean hours of observing him play with his Legos, But recently, my son Brandon and his son Ledger built a Lego Millennium Falcon. And I was super impressed that my daughter-in-law Jessie had the patience as she sat nearby for 17 hours that it took them to build the monstrosity. Alongside of her men, Jessie was offered opportunities for great conversations. As your son plays, don't take time to talk about all that's on your mind. Make yourself listen. Just sit with them. Just be quiet. Long periods of silence are okay. Don't feel like you have to fill it with words. Be still and let time unfold. Ask a thought-provoking question and then be quiet. I'm preaching to myself. I can remember when I would be trying to get a point across to my son, and my husband would just rub my leg in the car like, you've said enough, because I would just want to come at it from every angle. And Steve would be like, we're good. He heard you, or he didn't, but stop beating this horse to death. When you keep in mind that you're not there to tell them how to play or criticize their play or clean up after them, you're just there to enjoy them. Whether your son's an athlete or a spelling bee champion, a musician or a computer whiz, if you make a habit of spending time alongside of him, applauding his accomplishments, you will become an important part of his world, and your effort will say to him, I value you, so I value what's important to you. Hear out his struggle. When your son opens the window of his heart and he shares about his struggles, be really careful not to talk over him or to attempt to solve his issue. I do that. I'll start jumping in, trying to fix the situation for one of my kids, and they shut down. The danger of speaking over your son is that you may have all the answers, but he will end up just not taking time to listen to you. He won't want to hear what you have to say. I've watched my son, my children shut down when I've tried to jump in with quick fix answers for their problem. Proverbs 18:2 says, a fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart. Waiting for my son to take a breath so I could speak my mind, I have played the fool more times than I care to count. How about you? Can I get a witness? Wait for your son to talk. It's important for your son. It's possible your son may not even know exactly how he feels until he hears himself talk through what's going on in his mind. Though many of the issues that your son faces may seem trivial to you, don't minimize the impact that they are having on him. Saying things like, you won't even remember that girl's name tomorrow, is not helpful. Sibling rivalry. Let's talk about that really quick before we run out of time. When my kids were little, my two youngest ones, they started having this little competition and they were always at each other. And I remember watching a documentary and it was about siblings, and it was moms that were not with their kids, and they would put siblings in a room and they would video them together and they would play nicely. And as soon as the mom walked into the room, the siblings would begin arguing and telling on each other and taking the toy and telling mom, and mom would get in the middle of it and try to fix it. And that happened repeatedly with a bunch of different moms and a bunch of different sibling sets. And what this study, I wish I could remember what study it was so many years ago. What this study found was that children were just trying to engage mom in the argument. It was almost like I get a point or you get a point, whoever mom sides with. And while I was trying to be judge and jury for every infraction that was going on with my kids, I was engaging and I was exhausted. So I sat them down and I said, you know what? I've been doing this wrong. And mommy needs to ask your forgiveness that I have not been handling this correctly. And from now on, I'm not going to get involved. If you guys can't get share a toy, I'm going to take it away. There won't be any discussion. I'm not going to ask who had it first. You guys work it out or I'm going to take it. And of course, it wasn't long and they had to test that. And I took it. And I put it away. I didn't throw it away because I'm a keeper. I'm a keeper of all things special. If you watch any of my Instagram posts, you know that I have like stuff that my kids wore that now my daughter's kids are wearing, and it's super fun. But I put it away, and you have to be consistent with it, and you have to not get involved and not engage and not get upset and not who said what. It's just don't do it. And it finally was, I would hear them start and I would say, work it out. And then you'd hear, she's going to come and take it. She's going to come and take it. You have a turn, then I'll have a turn. And it worked. So if you've got littles that are having that type of sibling rivalry, try it. Try not engaging in every who did what. just tell them, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm just going to take it away. So either you work it out or it goes bye-bye. I'm not going to engage. Wow. I have to tell you, I experienced such freedom. And that reigned supreme until our kids hit junior high. And then we had to kind of work on that again because they were having conflicts over different things. They were both hormonal. The two younger ones were the closest in age. And we had to work on that again. But helping them learn, work it out. I'm not going to jump in there. I'm not going to resolve this conflict for you. Work it out. And then when they wouldn't work it out, Steve would jump in and say, you're not allowed to talk to each other. If you're talking in a mean way, you're not allowed to talk to each other. And if you talk to each other, you're grounded. And so for my son, Brandon, who's the quiet one, he was like, yay, she's not going to talk to me. But for Kayla, she died because she loved talking to her brother. But that helped too, because then they weren't allowed to talk to each other. So there was no bickering, and the bickering stopped. And that was great. And I remember one of the things that we said is the rule of this house is we don't argue here. We don't bicker here. We don't treat each other that way here. Now, of course, if you're bickering and arguing with your spouse or with your other kids, if you're engaging in arguments, it's going to kind of be hard for them to believe that. But if you resolve not to be one, the Bible says the man of God, the woman of God is not argumentative. If you learn to not jump in and have an argument about everything, you don't have to be right. You don't have to be heard. If you learn to walk in peace and live in peace in your home, guess what? Years later, when your kids are grown, they'll want to bring your grandkids to your house. They'll want to be with their siblings at your house because it's a place of peace and laughter and joy and fun. Laughing out loud together is so much more delightful than constantly bickering and putting each other down. Just don't let it happen. Just establish in your home a place that is going to be not about conflict. Because guess what? If they're bickering with their sibling, if they're arguing and putting each other down, they're going to do that with their spouse one day. Your home is the laboratory of learning, and you get to teach them how to resolve conflict in a way that is uplifting and not destructive. I was going to talk about pornography, and I'm almost out of time, but I'll tell you this. The world says it's okay, that there's nothing wrong with it. But pornography offers a cheap counterfeit of what God has intended for marriage and for sex to be. It is a representation of Christ's marriage to his bride and his love for the church. Christ's desire is that the church, his bride, is presented to him pure and spotless. This is our ultimate motivation, to remain pure in all that we do. Although the world says there's no harm in allowing your son to indulge in pornography, you would do well to consider God's warning in Proverbs 22:8. He says, he who sows iniquity will reap sorrow. God has given you, mom, the responsibility of training your son to guard his young and impressionable heart. So respectfully teach him the far-reaching consequences of pornography and the rewards of pursuing holiness. Remember, we talked about train his brain. There's a story in my book, Real Life Romance, about a young man named Chuck who opened the door to pornography when he was just a junior high boy. It was when the internet was new. He had no idea. And he, in his junior high mind, convinced himself that he would remain sexually pure until he got married by looking at pornography. That makes sense for a junior higher. What he didn't realize was after he was married, he couldn't put it away. It had become an addiction, because anyone who knows that what we feed our flesh craves. And God gave Chuck victory over that. You can read Chuck and Angie's story in my book, Real Life Romance. But guard your son. Help him to not open that door. Don't let him have a computer in his room in the privacy, or his phone in the privacy of his own room. That's giving Satan a foothold. Know that this is bigger than your son even knows. He doesn't even understand what a grip it can get hold of him. You do. So you get to have those conversations, those hard conversations with him. But if you don't have them, who's going to? If you don't speak truth into his life, where is he going to hear it? It's up to us. It's up to you to wisely discern how to have those conversations before your son is even looking at pornography. It's okay to bring it up and talk about it. He's probably heard about it, even if you don't think he has. It's okay to bring it up and talk about what's out there and what you want him to learn to guard himself from before it becomes an addiction, before it steals and kills and destroys all the good God has for him. Well, we kind of went long, but I didn't want to not talk about pornography. If you didn't read that kind of sounds weird, huh? If you didn't read the chapter 9, go back. There's a quote from Dr. James Dobson in there. There's a quote from my son-in-law, Jake Ebner, who was an RD at the Masters University. There's some really great insights in that chapter. And I just thank you so much for hanging with me. We're working through this book together, and we are done with chapter 9, and I will see you on chapter 10. Have a great night.